Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our first episode of Brain Food. I'm your host, Isaiah, and today I'm with my good friend and special guest, Kieran.
Hello.
On today's episode, we're going to dive into the topic of mental health and addictions. To start us off today, Kieran, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so pretty much I was a student at the University of Lethbridge doing new media. I did that for about 3 years out of the 5 years that I was supposed to be doing, but due to some mental health issues, I had to drop out. And in my spare time, I usually skateboard. I used to be a competitive snowboarder, but now I just do that recreationally.
Nice. Now, Kieran, can you tell us a little bit about how the pandemic affected your mental health?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. I know for a lot of people, even with no previous mental health issues, they were affected by the pandemic, but for me, it didn't really bother me that much. Besides just getting annoyed at how ineffective school online was, I really didn't like that part. I think part of the reason it didn't affect me is because I was isolating myself before the pandemic hit. I would get psychotic seeing friends and have bad anxiety, which prevented me from keeping up with friendships. I do think deep down it did affect me, but this was when I was close to my worst during my journey of mental illness.
When did you start using drugs, and what was going on in your life at the time?
Yeah, so I started using drugs in high school. Not really, what people would consider the bad ones. I mean, at that age, around like 14 or 15, it's still bad to be experimenting with any drugs, but it was just weed or cannabis and alcohol on the weekends. And it did turn into more of an issue later on. When I was that young, there wasn't really emotions I needed to be suppressing or anything to really cope with. I was kind of just more for the enjoyment factor. Yeah, when I was 15, I was just smoking, once a day, and it progressed when I was 16 to, 7 grams a day, which was, a ridiculous amount. And it didn't really have a toll on my mental health until I turned around 18.
So when you were 18, Kieran, what exactly did you notice changed for you?
Yeah, so I had a huge lack of emotion suddenly. I experienced my first psychotic episode after smoking, and that's kind of when things started to go downhill.
With your battle of addictions, did you notice a big change in your life?
Yeah, addictions changed my life for the worse, that's for sure, but that's the case in most addictions, but I wasn't aware how damaging it could really be. After smoking 7 grams of cannabis for 2 years and drinking heavily, I experienced my first psychotic episode, like I said, which included hearing voices, seeing demons as in hallucinating them, and this was by far the scariest experience I've ever experienced, but I was addicted to the substance so much that I kept smoking it despite the negative consequences, because every time I would light one up, I would get psychosis again, and I continued for, a few months, and I would just get psychotic every time. I didn't think much of it at the time since I didn't really know what I was experiencing, and I had a huge lack of awareness, but the turning point was kind of when I was hospitalized because it got to the point of driving recklessly because I thought, the police were after me, which is just profound. Like, you actually believe the thoughts that you're experiencing. It's really odd. So I found out that there was a name for what I was going through when I was hospitalized, and that would be psychosis. And when I decided to get clean from weed, I was still experiencing psychosis every day, and it was just getting worse. I needed something desperately to take the pain away or to fix these issues. I started experimenting with harder substances. You have a huge lack of care for yourself when using. You don't care about your mental health or physical health. These substances were helping to some degree, but once I got off them for a few weeks or months, I would notice the detrimental effects such as severe depression, severe psychosis, severe anxiety, and it would last past the withdrawal phase. So I was diagnosed with substance-induced psychosis later on, and I remember being clean from everything for 6 months. I did feel much better mentally, but then I would relapse and go back and progress substantially. This is a cycle I've been stuck in for about 4 years.
Alright, so that concludes our first episode of Brain Food. Thank you again, Kieran, for being our very first guest on the show and for sharing a little bit more about your life.
No problem, my pleasure.
But yeah, thank you again for listening, and I'll catch you guys next week.